Hi, so in this video we're going to build this site that I showed as an exercise, this snowboarding site. It's a fictitious snowboarding site, it doesn't really exist, and this is based on this site, which is a team of Shopify. Shopify is a shopping and online commerce platform, and they provided this template, and I think it sort of shows nicely what you can all do. So it sort of looks very daunting, but by the end of this video, which will be long, we will be able to make the same thing. So this is our own thing. As you have all these elements here, we have some jackets. We don't do the boots and all that thing because it's very similar. And then we have the footer. So all of these things are there in just the same way. And we'll start from scratch, although we will need the images for this project. So to follow along, I will post a link where you can download a zip file, and I'll show that now where you can do. So it's at github.com/fdb/snowdevil-site, and this link will be in the description as well. And here you can clone or download a zip file, and in that zip file will be all the images that you need. Now there's already the HTML, and the CSS is already there, so you can open it up and look at the site. But of course we're going to build those from scratch. So we'll make a new folder that just has this image folder in it, and doesn't have any of the other files, right? So I'm going to the desktop here. I'm going to create a new folder, call it Snowdevil, that's the name of the site. Paste in my image folder. So in my Snowdevil folder, I now have an image folder that contains all of these images. And so what are these images? Well, it's the hero image, so the one you see here in the background, the logo. We have some jackets, as you can see. We have this header background that we use here. And then we have these different collections here, and those are all labeled collections. So we have everything basically that we need to build out our site. So we're going now to Visual Studio Code, open our folder, and here we're going to choose this Snowdevil folder. So not the image folder, but the Snowdevil folder itself. Right, I'm going to make this a bit bigger for you. And you see I have my dock here on this side. If you want, you can have that as well, or you can move the sidebar to the left if you're used to that. So that's the normal way that you would see it. And I'll use that here because it's a default. So we're going to start with making a new file, the index.html file. Make sure that you get the extension right. And that's going to be our basic HTML file. And we'll start here from scratch, again by typing an exclamation point and then pressing either tab or enter to let Emmett do the work of generating our initial setup. So we have all of these things that we'll leave as they are, except that the title of our document is going to be Snowdevil. That's the name of our site. Already, we are going to include our CSS, and there's 3 pieces of CSS that we need. One is the CSS that we'll write ourselves. We'll do it in a minute. The second one is the font that we use from this website, and the third one is going to be Font Awesome, and that's the one that we're going to use for the icons. So you see here the shopping icon and the search icon here. They come from this Font Awesome font. So let's do Google Fonts first. So we'll go to fonts.google.com, and the font that we're using on this side is called Clara. So that's the font that we're looking for. Maybe not Clara. Carla, sorry. Carla. There we go. So we can click plus. It ends up in our little shopping cart here, and we can customize it because we also want the bold version of that font. And then we can copy and paste this piece of code and paste that here below our title. So that's our first font. Now, the second thing that we need is Font Awesome, and the newer versions are a bit tricky to use because they require us to basically type in our email address and things like that. Now, we could do that. That's fine. So we can actually name a project if we want. But we can also use an older version that has sort of the same icons, and it works just as well, I found. And so the way that we're going to use that is through a site called Unpackage, which is called unpkj, like this. And here we can use the site which is called Font Awesome. So after the URL, we'll just write -font awesome, and that will show us a link to Font Awesome. So that's the CSS that we need. And let's wait for that to come back for a minute. Seems to have a bit of problems giving us this URL here. Okay, and now it says cannot find index.js in Font Awesome. That's okay. We are just going to strip off this last part. It looks a bit like hacking, but it's actually one link that we really need here, and that's the one that I want to show. Why is this not showing up? Okay, what I'm going to do is just post this link into the document because I know exactly which one I need, which is this one. Note that these are just the icons or the positions of all the icons in the font. And this is actually the one that we need, and that contains our search icon and things like that. So I'm going to paste this in. Remember to write that in a link tag, so like this, just like the one before. And then the last link tag is going to link to our CSS. And to do that, we're going to make a folder CSS. And in that folder CSS, we're going to make a new file, main.css. And that's going to be our main thing. And here we might try to have our green background just to make sure that our CSS is linked up. So we're going to write link again, write CSS, and let the autocomplete do its work. So whenever we see the autocomplete, we can just press enter, and that will complete it for us. And we have prettier sort of formatting this thing. In this case, not very well, but whatever. Then we can go live, so we can click our live viewer here to actually see this page, and you should see a nice green page. If for some reason this live view doesn't work, you can always open that file up, right? So if you go to the desktop, you have your folder here. You can just take your index.html and either drag that in, so that will open it up, or just double click or right click and then choose open with Google Chrome, for example. It's not the same because you have to refresh if you do it that way, so it's easier and nicer to use the live preview. But if for some reason it doesn't work, you can still access your site, so don't worry about that. Okay, so we're going to write our header first, and maybe we'll do some generic things that we always want to do in CSS, and I'm just going to type them out here because they're useful to have everywhere. So first is star is a used box sizing border box, and we haven't talked too much about that yet, but during the classes you've noted me talking a little bit about this box model here, so all of these boxes, and border box is just a more sane version of this that we want to use everywhere. So this star basically means use that everywhere. Then also we want to make it responsive by setting max width of images to 100%, so that means that the images never grow bigger than the container that they're in. And we're also going to style our links a little bit. We're going to say we don't want any text decoration, so no underline, and also the color of the links is just going to be the color of the parent element. So for example, if our parent element is black, then our links are going to be black as well. And finally, we're going to style our HTML element here. We're going to set the font size to 16 pixels. We're going to use that Carla font that we've provided. So Carla. If Carla is not available, or if we're still waiting for it to download, we're going to use sans serif. So this is a fallback font. So this means use this font, prefer to use this font, but if it's not available, use this other font as well. We're going to set our color to a grayish color, so 6666. We're going to set our line height to 1.4, and this is one of the few values that doesn't have any unit behind it. 1.4 basically means the regular line height plus 0.4 times the regular line height, so, and that's basically dependent on the font size. Okay, so we put all of these things in our HTML, so that allows us to use rems everywhere else if we want to. And then in our body, we're going to get rid of the color, but we're going to set the margin to 0, which allows us to make the header right until the edge of the screen here. Right. So now we just get an empty white page, right? Note that I always have the developer tools open here, so I can actually inspect that everything goes the way that I want. And here I see the body, the box sizing, the HTML. So all of the things that I wrote here are available there. Nice. So if we study the header here, we note that it actually consists of two parts. There's the first line of the header, the first row of the header, and then we have this second row that has all these navigation links here. So we're going to do it in two parts as well. So make the first row and make the second row. Now, we've learned to use Flexbox as a layout tool and CSS Grid as a layout tool. And so I want you to think, as we're going through this, think ahead and think about how can we style this. And so this is a CSS Flexbox thing that would work perfectly with Flexbox, where we have one element right all the way to the left and one other element, that's these two links here, going all the way to the right. And then we have a lot of space in the middle that we can use with space between in Flexbox. Cool. So we're going to write our header by just writing header as a tag and typing spacebar. And we want to have two header rows, so we're going to write div header. And I'm going to use this system. You don't really have to use it, but I like using it, which is called BEM. And it's not really important. The idea is only that we sort of group every CSS clause that sort of belongs together. So what I mean by that is our header, so everything for our header has this thing that starts with word header and then has this double underscore and then has some other value. So here we use header row. In a minute we're also going to use header logo or header nav, for example, for these navigation things. And that sort of keeps everything nicely together. And it means that if we call something row, for example, then that also might apply to rows that appear here. But if we write it header row like this, it's sort of obvious that it's part of the header. Again, it's a convention. It's not something that the browser picks up or notices at any point, but it's just for us to make it clear. And you'll see this in other places as well. So that's why I use it here. But again, it's not required or anything. It's just a nice way to write it, I think. And we're going to use it throughout this tutorial. So I can press tab here if I stop talking, or press enter. That's going to create my header row. And inside of my header row, I want to have two parts. The first part is the left part, and then the other part with the logo, and the other part is this icons part. Okay, so for my header logo, what I want to do is make another div, header underscore underscore logo. And that's going to have an image, and an image will link to img/ and then Snowdevil logo. So that's the logo. Now here we can use this alt tag. So for people who can't actually see or have trouble seeing the content of the site, we can also use this alternative text to write what we actually are seeing or looking at. And so here I will call it Snowdevil logo. So even if you can't see the image, you know that here's the logo of the site. Cool. So that's our first element on our page. That's for our first group, sorry, this part. And then the second part inside of that first header row is our yeah, it's kind of difficult, like header, let's call them icons or something, header icons maybe. And these are our Font Awesome icons. Now, we won't make them work. You'll see that they're a bit different. So these are not from Font Awesome. These are the ones that are from Font Awesome, and I can use them freely. So that's why I use these. So in Font Awesome, we can go look for an icon of a cart, for example, a shopping cart. And that will give us all of these carts. We want this one. And here there's some copy, some HTML that we can copy. And now it would be nice that this immediately worked. And I was hoping that it would. But if we go look at the site, unfortunately, we get this empty block here. And I found that it works just by removing this S. So instead of writing FES, so FAS, we just write FA like this, and then we would see our little shopping cart. The reason is because the documentation is actually for the newer version of Font Awesome, version 5, whereas we are using version 4.7. And so the styling is a bit different, but the names most of the time match up. Okay, So we have an E. The I actually stands for italic, but we use it here as an icon of our shopping cart. And we want to do the same thing for our search. Actually, our search goes first. So we write search here. We search for our search icon. We select this one. And here as well, we copy this HTML. We paste it here before our search icon. And again, here we don't forget to remove the S. So Font Awesome is really cool because we can just use our icon font immediately. We don't have to install very much. All I have to do is copy this magic line of CSS code, and then we can just use icons everywhere in our site, which is super convenient. Okay, and that's actually our first row done. Of course, we didn't do any styling yet, so it sort of looks like crap, but that's our next part. So now going to our CSS, and I'll put these side by side and remove my sidebar here. We have some work cut out for us to make the header. So the first thing that we're going to do is sort of delineate the fact that we have a header. So we're going to write a little comment for ourselves here saying, okay, here's the part of the header. And what's super obvious with the header, I am going to close a couple of these things down so you can actually see. So what's super obvious with the header is that it's black, right? So the background here is black. Another thing that is super obvious is that there's a lot of white space going around. So there's a lot of padding going here. And you see that, so this already works. It's a bit big though. But this is in general a good trick, is to use a lot of padding and just go all out with the padding, and then later on remove some padding if you think it's too much. It's easier to remove padding, I find, than adding it later, and so it's sort of nice to have lots of padding, so 30 pixels, 50 pixels, to give everything some breathing room, some space. So in this case, I'm just going to do padding top, and in a minute I'll be clear why. And then also I'm going to set the text color to white, right? Because otherwise it's black on black. Okay, so we see that we have the icons now in white because the icons are sort of interpreted as text, right? They're a font. And then we have this icon here. Now here we can use flexbox for our header row to make sure that these elements appear next to each other. So it's not the header element that has this, but it's the header row, right? Because everything's inside of this header row. So we'll write dot header underscore underscore row, and here's the magic line. And note that I'm making the site here for desktop, not for mobile. That's just because I'm being a bit lazy, but also because I want to have some reasonable time to show you all of the parts that go into this website, and there's a lot of them. So already focusing on desktop will be enough, I think. So this line basically says, okay, the site will never be wider than 1180 pixels, which means that even if we make our page really wide, all the elements will sort of nicely fit into center. But as you can see here, they're centered, right? So that doesn't really happen here. And to make that happen, we are going to use margin 0. So that means that the top and bottom margins will have 0, and then auto for the left and right margins. So this thing is shorthand notation. It's the same as writing margin top 0, margin bottom 0, and then margin left auto and margin right auto. And so you see here, we wrote this into one line instead of 4 lines. And so this first value, so if we give it 4 values here, then they mean something else. If we give it 1 value, it's the same for everything. If we give it 2 values, we provide a horizontal and a vertical value. So this is the vertical value, the top and the bottom, and this is the horizontal value, so this is left and right. So that's actually what we're doing here. Right, and so if we refresh now, we see that we have our maximum width set here. So the margins on the left and the right are automatically defined. So they're basically what's left of this. And you can see this if you go in the header row. You see that you have the margins here on the side. If I might make the page bigger, you see that the margins increase, but the size of the content always stays the same, 1180 pixels. Although we can get smaller if we want to. So that those lines will be repeated a couple of times for all the different elements in our page, as you'll see. And then the element itself, we want to use flexbox here. we want these elements to be in a row, which is the default, so we don't have to specify flex direction row, although we can. But what's important here is that we want to justify the content using space between. So we want one element, the header logo, to appear on one side and the icons on the other side, and the space between is sort of distributed between these two elements. So as you can see here, we have the element here and the element here. We also want to align them because they're not centered here, so we want to say, okay, align the items to the center. So that aligns them here to the center. Now our image that we provided here, we also want to style. And to do that, what we're going to do is also give this image a class. So we're going to say class is equals header underscore underscore image, maybe, or well, let's do it a different way. Let's write header logo, because we have a class not for this image element, for the element above it. So we can write space image, and that space basically means, okay, the image element that appears inside of that header. And what do we want to say here? Well, the max width, so the maximum size of that image is 165 pixels. And if I'm correct, that's actually half of the image size of this. So this is actually provided in double size. Why is that? Well, because if we have a retina screen, for example, our mobile phone or our Mac, then the resolution or the density of the screen is actually much smaller. So the pixels are much smaller here, but we still provide them in pixels. So by making a bigger image and scaling it down, we actually provide a nice crisp logo even on retina screens. And this starts to look okay. We don't have our bottom margin yet, but that's because we want to use a different way of providing that. So what I'm going to do here for our header row is basically add a margin bottom, and I'll make it wrong now, but I'll fix it in a minute, because I want to use two header rows, and as you can see, nothing happens. So here this works, but in a minute it won't. So I have to be a bit careful here on how I do this. So I've been doing this through also a little bit of trial and error, which you can do as well. And sometimes it's a bit playing around with margin or padding to make sure that it appears the way you want. Because I want to focus on this second row here. And as you can see, we have this space here between these two rows. But here the space is sort of different, right? Because the space is also part of this link. So we have to be a bit careful on how we design this. Anyway, that will be clear in a minute. So the idea is to make a second header row. So we're going to write div again, header underscore underscore row. And this row is going to contain our navigation. So this part. And then as you can see on the side, we have this simple link here, this account link. So actually these are also flexbox with space between, where one element is really big and one element is this really small, tiny thing. But it's still the same thing. We still want to use flexbox here. So because we're using a header row, we are already using flexbox, and we're already using justify content space between. So we don't have to do anything. We're using the same CSS class here, which is obviously the whole point of the exercise. So I want to make it the navigation, so I'm going to write header underscore underscore nav for navigation. And then inside of that navigation, I'm just quickly going to type all of these brands here. So I'm going to write a link. Now this link doesn't go anywhere, so the hashtag means nowhere. So that's our home link. And now I'm going to copy and paste this line down, and it can hold some magic keyboard shortcuts, a command, option, shift and down to actually copy this line down if it works, which it doesn't. Okay, so never mind. Copy, paste, 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 paste. And we're just going to repeat these things, right? So second one is called snowboard. Third one is ski. Then we have men. Then we have women. Then we have boards. Then we have brands. Then we have accessories. And then we have sale. So these are all the navigation links, right? And as you can see here, they sort of appear, but there's still some work with styling, but it's okay. Let's make this second div here our header, and we will call it header underscore underscore account, because that's the link that's there. And also here we're going to make a link that goes nowhere with the word account. So that's our other side of the page, and you see it appear here, which is nice. There's something special about this one. Well, no, let's talk about that later. I want to style the first link a bit differently, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So for our navigation, nav, we're also going to use display flex. So these now appear right next to each other. And so here what we want to do is for each of these navigation items, and we can refer to them as header nav A, because they're links inside of that navigation, we want all of them to have a margin right of 30 pixels. So that gives us a bit of space between these elements. As you can see, I typed them here using title case, so the first case uppercase and then lowercase. But here they actually appear as uppercase. Now we can use this text transform property to turn them into uppercase. So we don't actually have to change the text. We can use text transform to actually make that text different. You'll see that there's also capitalized, lowercase, and uppercase, as you can see here. So there's all these other options as well. They're a bit less bright in my version, so I'm going to make them a bit less bright here, like this. And then I also want to use the font weight bold, right? But as you can see here, the first one is a bit special because it has this underline. So we want to basically be able to indicate where we are in our page and then highlight that one. So we're going to add a class to our first link. So we're going to write class equals, and here we can write header underscore nav, and then we write dash dash active. And again, this is a convention from BEM, which I talked about. The idea is that this dash dash means what's the state of this element. So it's still a piece of the header navigation, but it's an active piece. So this active means, okay, this is the one that's selected. Again, it's a convention. If you just write my active link, then it will work as well. But I like looking at it like this. So I'm going to write header nav dash dash active to indicate, okay, this is the active one. And so what's different with this one? Well, the color is different. So it's white, and we'll also have to save our HTML document. As you can see, nothing happens. Awesome. Strange. Okay, so this might be a good time to talk about debugging. Let's open our header row here. Let's open our navigation, and you see that we have our first link here. And this is interesting because we have our header nav active, but you can see it's swiped through. Now we're used to the fact that the one that we wrote here always appears first, but this one appears first. We didn't actually talk about this. Why does this one appear first and the other one appear second? Well, CSS uses this system of points, and we don't really want to go into it. But the idea is that to fix this, we actually have to be as specific as this one at least. So we see that we're a bit more specific here because we refer to the header navigation and then tags inside of it. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to write header nav and then refer to, okay, the A, we can actually write A with the header nav active. And now we're a bit more specific than this one, and so this one will take precedence here, as you'll see. So now this one goes first, as you can see, and then this color gets strike through because it's no longer active. This white color is now active. Cool. We also want to do the thing here at the bottom, and so the best way that I found, the official site actually uses a different system. But the way that I want to do it is basically look at it as the border that's around this element and then only draw the bottom border. So if we just write for this element, if we would write like border, then we would say 3 pixels solid 006EFF, then we would get an entire border around this element, right? but we only want the bottom border. So we're going to write border bottom like this. But it's a bit different, right? Because we have this space between. And so this space actually appears between the element and its border. So going to our box model here, if we scroll all the way down, we can see it. We see we have our content here. We don't have any padding, and then we have the border around it immediately. And then we have some margin of 30 pixels to the side, which we already defined. So basically we want something extra here. We want some padding at the bottom. Now, we don't want it only here, we want it actually for all of the navigation elements. So we're going to write padding bottom of 20 pixels. And now it's sort of obvious why the thing that I did here at the top doesn't actually work here, because we are adding some extra padding after the row. For this row and this row, we're adding some padding, which is fine for this first row, but it's not okay for this second row, because our second row already has this extra padding. Actually, this line goes right until the top of this image. So to change that, what we're going to do is for our header row is to apply this padding bottom, but not for the last element. And there's a couple of ways that we can do that. I'm just going to write here header row, and then write, okay, last child. So the last header row, basically we want our padding bottom to be 0. So this is one way of doing it. And so if we, and as you can see, it works. Let's see what's actually going on here. So our first header row, we just have our padding bottom here. For our second header row, we also have our padding bottom of 0, and this padding bottom is crossed through. So last child basically means, okay, we have multiple elements on our page. Most of the time it's multiple of the same elements. Take the last child, so the last element of that header, and that specifically is not going to have this rule. So this extra rule where it says the padding bottom is now turned off. So cool, seems that it works. There's one slight problem which we can't actually see, so it's kind of annoying. But this is sort of a best practice. The problem is, and it's completely non-obvious here, but sometimes the problems with these border bottoms is that we are going to move our content if we add a border to one element, so the rest of the elements shift. As you can see here, it's not really a problem, but I'm going to show it anyway, what I talk about. So actually we want the border to be here. Now, of course, they all get this border, which is not really what we want. So what we want is we want them all to have a border, but only the last one we want to have a color. So we're going to basically say, well, the border bottom here is transparent. It doesn't actually have a color, but it's there. But the active one has a border bottom color of this specific color, right? So we don't have to specify the width and the type of the border anymore, but just the fact that it has a color. So as you can see, now we have this underline here only in this one, but they actually all have borders. As you can see, they're just transparent. So this is a nicer way, because sometimes the elements will shift around, and this is a way to avoid that. For our account link, we see that the place of the account link is a bit weird. We thought that we had our elements centered on this page, because we set that with Flexbox. But the problem is that these elements all have a padding of 30 pixels, and our account element doesn't actually have that padding. So we can add that padding here to our account as well. So we can refer to it header account. We can give it a color, same one as the others. We can give it a font size, maybe it's a bit smaller than the other links. And then we can say padding bottom. We use 30 pixels, so let's try 30 pixels, see if that works. It's sort of visually checking whether that's okay-ish. Maybe not entirely. So we're going to, yeah, so we can try it out here. Maybe 20 pixels, as you can see, is enough. So we're going to change that here to 20 pixels to actually make it align up with the rest of the site. Okay, so that's a lot of work, but as you can see, we've now done our header. Everything's finished, everything works. There's a lot of other stuff that we can style if we want to. Or maybe there's one last thing that I really want to do, and that's our header icons here. So I'm going to find a nice place to put them, maybe after the header logo, because they're sort of near that part. So our header icons, here we want to say, well, the so the icons themselves, we want to have them a little bit of margin here. And here we can use margin left of 1 rem, for example, to give them a bit of margin, although, yeah, here they are. They sort of disappear because they still need to load. So if we look at them, they all have this margin to the side, and that's perfect. So I think we're done with the header here. We've done all the styling. We have our header row, and you can see that's basically an exercise in breaking down the page into either Flexbox or CSS Grid, and then sort of going through the elements element by element and figuring that out. And if you make your design in Figma, this is actually a good exercise for you to also try to do that part by part. See you in the next video, where we'll design the main section of our page.